Everyone tonight. We have all of the commissioners present except for Commissioner Helgeson and Commissioner Daly, both of whom are excused. So let's go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And tonight we've asked Commissioner Wright to offer a prior legislative prayer thought.
Thank you, Chair. I was thinking about what we do here, and particularly about what we do as commissioners in proactive planning and how we're trying to be proactive in how we our approach towards planning in the city and how we govern that way. And I think sometimes it's easy to make goals and easy to say things that we want to do, and then sometimes it's harder to see that those things happen. And so I just have a little motivational quote that says, "The only place where success comes before work is in the dictionary." And I think that's important so that we understand that, the goals that we want to talk about and that we've identified as goals for each year need to come with some work. We need to put some work behind those and understand that we're not going to be successful just by making a goal, but actually by working towards that. So I would just encourage us to do that, and I'll say a quick prayer. Father in heaven, we're grateful that we could meet together today as a commission, and we pray for thy spirit to be upon our city, to help us to work together in thoughtful ways, and that as a city we will strive to understand and collaborate with one another, and that we will work hard to do the best for all of the citizens in our great city. And we thank thee for our blessings and say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much for that. First up tonight, we are being asked to consider the proposed home occupation conditional use permit for Moon Products LLC. So we'll turn time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. Just by recap, you're looking at tonight a conditional use permit. It's a request of a person who would like to, the applicant would like to have a home occupation in their home. As I understand their product, and they'll be able to answer questions or discuss that with you, they have
Corey,
a small...
Sorry, excuse me. If I'm going to recuse myself, should I do so before you start the discussion?
Yes.
Okay. He happens to be my neighbor, so I'm just going to recuse myself because of that. So.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's right. Thank you. So back on track, the home occupation that they desire on their property is they have a small manufacturing, it's a coin-operated machine that they create, and they can explain the details to you, but it's a small product that they ship out to a few vendors, and then they might have that shipped back for some repair. He's inherited this business through the family, and he'd like to continue operating that small hobby business. I guess it was what we labeled it in the report. And so when we applied for the home occupation, there are a certain number of permitted uses. So example is a home office. That's pretty standard. People have an office out of their home. And there's parameters in a permitted use situation. As long as they meet those, they can move forward under a zoning administrator approval and receive their home occupation license. In this case, this involves some retail, although it's a drop shipment type retail or a personal delivery retail. It does involve the building of the product and manufacturing it on site and then sending it out and then bringing them back for repairs. And that's not a use in the permitted category. So according to the zoning ordinance, a person that desires to have a home occupations that's not on the permitted use list, it bumps them into a category that they can come to the commission, they can discuss the nature of the business, you can look at the conditional use process, and they have some added elements in the home occupation ordinance about traffic and the number of meetings and things of that nature. The design of that discussion is to say, can this home occupation be compatible in the neighborhood? If there is some impacts, what would they be, and can they be managed appropriately? So the request is to obtain this conditional use permit from the commission so they can proceed to have this hobby business at their home. Additional component that's added to this application is our current home occupation requires it all to be conducted inside the home and not exceed 20% of the home as area. The rest of the home is to be for residential uses. In the case of the applicant, they desire to use some accessory buildings for the storage of their tools. The way we heard it from the discussion with the applicant, it would be similar to somebody having like their wood shop or something in their garage or some other place and building and using their tools in there. So they'd like to also have that opportunity. And that is something that the commission can modify under the CUP parameters, allow accessory. To give you kind of examples, if you recall, for CUPs, we do have a bakery that was approved in a home occupation. They converted a portion of their basement to that devoted use. We also have one that's not like the business, but similar situation. We have the inflatable toys that you use at the large parties, the big bounce houses. We have approved one of those, and they did use their accessory garage for an opportunity to store some of that equipment. So if you recall, you've looked at a couple of home occupations in the past. We don't get a lot of these, so it's part of recalling the parameters of your role here. I'm substituting for Cassie. She unfortunately had to attend a family funeral back in Ohio, and she'll be back tomorrow. So think of her and hope for the best in the family, and hopefully they had a good celebration of life during the funeral. So I'll cover her into the report. She did go through and analyze the CUP standards to you. As I read the report, the discussion is this is a fairly low-key manufacturing. I think it recalls that they maybe do 1 or 2 a month of actually building the machine and may do a few repairs each month to anything that might be problematic with the machine and their vendors. So it does seem like a small hobby business. It doesn't take up a lot of space. We did view it, like I said, the example of a wood shop in their shed, so we didn't see that it changed any nature of the buildings. There's no additional power that's required. There's no additional utility services that are required than you would have in a normal garage or home situation. He did indicate in his application that it is a hobby business, so they do have the evening hours, and probably when you get a bright idea of how to fix something, you wake up in the middle of the night and you try to fix it and explore your idea. All we view that is we do have a noise ordinance, so we didn't feel the operation has particular needs for saying it should be cut off at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. We looked at it and said, as long as you comply with the municipal code's noise ordinance, basically it's not doing deliveries between 10 o'clock and 6 a.m. and that there's a decibel level. So they can describe the manufacturing and the tool process, but we didn't, looking at the application, see that it would have an unusual amount of noise in creating the product. And so we included in our analysis that if you moved towards an approval, that it'd be subject to the municipal code, which is standard across the residential. So this would be very similar to the wood shop. If you make a lot of noise in the wood shop at 3 a.m., you might get a complaint from your neighbor, and the city may be looking at its noise ordinance to see if you were really that loud. So as a whole, staff is recommending approval. I think she outlined several conditions that you can explore for this approval, and at this point we think it's anything of concern is greatly mitigated by the operation itself, as well as a few minor call-outs that we store the tools and the product and things inside the buildings and not in the yard. So we recommend approval.
Thank you very much, Corey. Does anyone have any questions for staff? All right, we'll go ahead and invite the applicant to step forward if you'd like to address this.
Got a microphone?
Either microphone.
Either one.
If you could just state your name for us, for the record.
My name is Justin Moon, and I am the owner of Moon Products, LLC. How much would you like to know?
Can you tell us a little bit about what the machines are and what you expect to do with them?
Yes, the machine is intended to count quarters. So you take a bucket of quarters and dump it in the top. It sits off the desk maybe 10 inches. It's kind of a small thing. It's constructed of black sewer pipe and sheet plastic with a motor inside and a few other electronics and little bits. It's primarily sold to car washes, laundromats, people that use quarter coin-operated machines. All over the country, and mostly it's shipping. I have some customers in Utah. Some of them like to drive their machine up to my house to drop it off for me to repair. That hasn't happened in a long time. It's kind of rare. So again, it would be taking things to the local FedEx place, dropping them off to ship, and then occasionally receiving shipments at my house for machines to repair. As far as the noise ordinance, all of my, if you look at the diagram, to the right of the house is the shed, labeled as shed number 1. Everything stays in there, except for one big bag of packing peanuts that's in my garage because I don't quite have enough room in the shed. But it's tools like you would find in a wood shop, a bandsaw, a drill press, a workbench with some hand tools. As far as the noise goes, it's an insulated shed, and from the neighbor's house, if I turn on my noisiest machine, it sounds like my garage door is going up. That's about as high as it gets. What else would you like to know?
Does anyone else have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll go ahead and open the public hearing and invite anyone who wishes to speak to this matter to step forward. Seeing no one step forward, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any further questions for staff? Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion for the Planning Commission to recommend approval of the conditional use permit for the home occupation for Moon Products LLC at 365 West, 1350 North, with conditions 1 through 6 in the staff report and for the reasons for actions A through C in the staff report.
Second.
Thank you. The motion has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate?
Would you say that the planning commission approves?
Yes, I was just going to say, I don't think we're recommending approval, are we?
Oh, yeah, it would be, you
It
approve.
should just be the Planning Commission to approve the conditional use permit. That's why I hesitated. Can I amend my motion to that effect?
Yes. Okay, any further discussion or debate on the amended motion? All right, let's take a roll call. Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that's been approved. Thank you very much. We'll wait for Commissioner.
Madam Chair, can I address the applicant?
Oh, sure.
Donna, the administrative assistant, you've been working with the business license. She'll be in tomorrow, and we can finish up the business license. The only thing is I think she's talked to the fire department to make sure they're okay. I don't think the fire department has a lot of inspection because you don't have hazardous materials, but it's part of our home occupation business license program. So if you contact Donna tomorrow, she can give you where she's at with that process, and you can be on your way.
We'll welcome Commissioner Wright back. And move along to item number 2. We're being asked to consider the proposed preliminary subdivision for Moss Acres, 4-lot, single-family subdivision located at 2026 North Main. And we'll turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Commission. We are reviewing the application for preliminary subdivision. So this is a project you've seen at a conceptual level. The purpose of the conceptual level is to introduce the project, understand the parameters of what they're looking at, and then move forward to preliminary, which is really the pertinent review for compliance with the subdivision ordinance in preparation of a subdivision plat. As you recall, this is at 2026 North Main. There is an existing home. We provided that earlier in your report. This is an older home on the project. There were early attempts in the conceptual to look at trying to salvage this home. And what was interesting is between conceptual and the preliminary submittal, since we're in the hillside ordinance, they have to do a geotechnological study for the property to look at any potential problems with the soils or any geologic hazards. And the interesting factor is they dug a trench. It was following some of the sewer lines, so I think all of us were a little bit surprised at first, but we found a surface fault. It looks like a secondary surface fault area. According to the geologic report, there were some early discussions of saying, well, this was convenience with the sewer, but when everything was looked at, and we looked at the state Utah Geological Survey map, and they do indicate a possible surface fault rupture in this location. So that did not change the idea of creating 4 lots for the subdivision, but it significantly impacted the layout of the lots. And so I'll come back here, Moss Acres preliminary. In your report, I'm not sure how it shows up very well on the screen, but I'll kind of enhance it. The home sits, wish we had a colored marker, but you can see the cursor. The home sits here in the kind of the south center area of the project. And the fault line runs across, we don't know if it goes all the way across 1250, but it's assumed it goes across 1250, follows south, and then heads to a southeast direction across the property. That created a significant location where dividing up the properties and reorienting the lots and creating the buildable space became pretty constrained with the fault line. The fault line was listed as a secondary. Under our geologic hazard ordinances, that secondary fault can be reduced from a 50-foot setback to a 30-foot setback, but it has to be found compatible in the geologic ordinance or a geologic study and acceptable to the city engineer and ultimately reviewed by the approving body to be defined as acceptable. The plat currently lists where the geotechnical engineer's setbacks. I think it's 27 something on the uphill side and 31 feet on the downhill side. Our geologic ordinance does not let you go below 30 regardless. So there needs to be a shift on the line to the uphill to go to the 30 foot. So we need to move that a couple of feet to accomplish that. And in the case of the downhill, we're at 31.8, I think it said in the report. So we need to shift that line to the 31.8 and not down to the 30 because the geotech showed at 31.8. So we do need to see adjustment of that surface fault rupture zone to meet the geotech recommendation, if that's the minimum, or their minimum of 30, whichever is greater. We did substantial discussion on talking about the existing home. It sits inside the setback, so it's there. We did talk with the developer about adjusting the lot lines to give some additional room for that existing home. So they could do some additions if need be, because it encompasses nearly their entire front yard. So expanding to the north is difficult. The home is an older home. rock foundation. At some point in time, maybe somebody wants to do away with the home. So we wanted to create as much space as possible to the south end of the lot in a buildable area so that if there needed to be some replacement, there was potential. But lot 3 in this case is fairly constrained. We do require in our hillside ordinance that when somebody builds a home or it's platted in this area, they do need to sign an acknowledgement that they're building in a hazardous area. And we've typically done that at building permit. We just know it's in the hillside, so we have an automatic form that they have to sign, notarize, and is recorded with the property. I'm just calling it out in this report as we might want to put that on the plat. We've not done that in the past because it's really done at building permit, but I think it wouldn't hurt to have that note placed on the plat in this case. So lots 3 and lot 4 are encumbered by that surface fault rupture area. That shifted the lots, so now you have 2 lots that are primarily off of 1250 North. You have a corner lot, lot 2. We anticipate the driveway will also be off of 1250 North, and we will use an existing curb cut on Main Street. They would need to go to UDOT if they want to do any widening for that curb cut, but we'll use that existing curb cut for lot 1. So it shifted the lots around from your conceptual if you notice that. The amendments for you previously reviewed amendments for lot widths, and the council did approve that. All of the lots will meet now the 80-foot requirement. We are in an RL zone, which is typically 60. This will meet the 80-foot requirement on the plat. I call out in the staff report just a couple of things. We think it complies substantially with everything. We just call out that future note on the plat, the geologic study to be adjusted, and I think that covers most of the requirements for the hillside overlay. In our report, we call out the utility easements. We were focused on this geotech study. So the preliminary plat doesn't show the required frontage. Every lot along a street front is a 10-foot utility easement, and then you have to pick a side and a rear of your lot line to have the 7-foot easements. So those I didn't see those on the plat, so I call that out. The secondary irrigation service, in reviewing their response, they have capacity to serve the project, but it's unverified yet if additional shares are required to service the lots. And so we call out that as part of their final, they need to get with Weber Basin and verify if they have to purchase shares or are the shares attached with the property sufficient for secondary irrigation. But it is available either way. They'll just need to make the secondary irrigation available to them through that provider. Fire hydrant spacing, I know we talked about this early on in the submittal with the developer. I think the spacing in general is okay, but all of the hydrants are located across the street from the project. And I know the engineer, I didn't remember at the time of the writing of the report, we had a discussion. If a fire breaks out, we certainly can't shut down Main Street traffic to tap into that fire hydrant. That would be catastrophic from a traffic standpoint. And so I just call out one more conversation with the fire department tactically to make sure we meet our hydrant spacing, or if there are fire codes applicable to when traffic is allowed to be cut off. I know that on local streets they have apparatuses that they place the fire hoses in for traffic to go back and forth, but I think Main Street is a big concern. And so I'd just like the fire department to look at it one more time, look at their fire ordinances and make sure that the hydrant spacing it works. So I put that in my recommendation. I think the other thing that's fairly significant, and you'll see a number of items I call out in the report. If you go back to the plat, this old house had a nifty system of driveways and pathways. And in some ways it would have been nice to preserve some of them because they put some effort into some of the walls. But we do have the issue that there are buildings dispersed throughout the property, and there's these driveways dispersed throughout the property. And from my viewpoint, the one is a very clear code requirement of that you can't have accessory buildings if you don't have your primary use. Fortunately, on their plans, it looks like all but one of the buildings they're demolishing. And then there's this small box that is undefined on the plat that I call out. I assume it's going to be removed. It just didn't call out. I'm not sure what that small box feature is on lot 4. But on lot 4, you can see this. They'd like to keep this garage. It's normally associated with the house, but they'd like to keep this garage on the property. The commission has dealt with this in the past. There's been a lot of different ways to solve it, trying to put notes, giving people 1 year. We still have a subdivision out there that hasn't been built on and still has a barn on it. And we've never solved the problem with demoing the barn because there's no house on the lot yet. And that's been probably a good 12 years since that's happened. What we've done in the past that's been fairly successful in this is we require the demolition in the bond. So the concept is that you'll put, whether it's 5, 8, 10,000 into your improvement bond for the demo of the building, and then the subdivision improvements, you have 18 months to put in the laterals and the connections and the sewers. And so what we're saying in this recommendation, and I think it's a discussion with the applicant, what the recommendation is saying is put the 10,000, 8 to 10,000 in the bond improvements. You have 18 months. In that 18 months, if a house comes in on lot 4 and is sold and they start construction of the home, we're now back in compliance with the zoning code. If it exceeds 18 months, what's that?
The recorder just
Died. We better get the recorder back on. Pause, Madam Chair, for a break on the recorder.
Now is the time when I wish I had the Jeopardy music on my phone, right? While we're all thinking.
We could do a public service announcement for YouTube, but I haven't made one up. We're back on? Okay.
Is it still on YouTube or it was just,
No, YouTube's still on.
okay.
And let's make sure. Yep,
Yep, we're good.
we're still live with YouTube. So we're back. What I was discussing with is the bonding of this shed. We're recommending that the 18-month bond for it be put into the 18-month improvement plan. If a house comes, great. If it doesn't, if it's not sold by then the developer would be required to tear down the building, and then it would be back into compliance. So I think that's a discussion to have. 18 months is a period of time. I don't know how fast the market would be. There may be some other solutions to talk about, but I feel that this is the way to an surety, where notes on the plat and some other things are less likely to bring it into compliance. So I think that's a discussion. But with that, I think the changes are at a point, and the engineering is to the point that we could probably move on to final. That'll wrap up here with the Planning Commission, and then you would see it one more time to verify that these items have been taken care of before you send it on to the council. But again, that's your decision if you think it can proceed to that. So I've covered the recommendation to set it up to be all conditioned on what it takes to submit a final. So that's our recommendation, is that you now approve the final and allow them to move, or approve the preliminary and allow them to move to final for consideration.
Thank you, Corey. One clarification with regard to placing a note on the plat listing the hazard. In the staff report it says all lots, and I think I heard you say lots 3 and 4. Is it all lots or just some lots?
It's all lots that are in
All
a hillside. So whether they have one in, we make them sign that.
Okay,
Sorry, it is all lots.
no worries. And Lisa, you're fine with that? You don't have any concerns with having that called out on the plat?
Yeah, I think it's good because it gives people in the development notice that they have to sign that, because they might buy a lot and not know, because we require that at building permit.
Okay,
So I like that idea.
great. Any other questions for staff?
Corey, how did you come up with the 18-month time frame for having something on the lot 4?
Great question. If we tie it to the subdivision improvements, we have an installation period that is 18 months. That's the city code for 18 months. So they have 18 months to put those improvements in. They bond for those. Then once they put that in or complete some of it, we begin to release the bond so that they can pay off their expenses. And then at the 18-month mark, an inspection is made, and the improvements are to be complete. And the city has two choices: to extend that 18-month period to complete the improvements, or call upon the bond to install those improvements. And that's where the 18 months comes from. And so I'm tying instead of having multiple bonds sitting out there, I'm just tying the demolition to that improvement bond, because that's our 18-month period, and then we can only hold warranty for 1 year on the improvements. So I'm tying it to that bond, so it's all in one product, one bond, one setup system. But I think that's why I bring it up as a discussion point.
And then if it were to extend, how likely is it to extend?
With this subdivision with existing streets, it'll likely be done in 18 months, any improvements. If we had some roadways, sometimes it does take longer. The larger the project, it may take some time, and depending on the weather, but I perceive that their 18 months gives the end of, or the middle of the end of this summer from recording to the first half of, or all of next summer to install it. So I don't see this subdivision going beyond 18 months for the improvements.
And if it were hypothetically to go beyond, it would extend that desire to need to demo that as well?
Yeah, I
tie
mean,
it to that?
I think the discussion is if all the improvements in and we're ready to go to warranty, to close that out, they would have to demo the structure.
Great.
And that's, I think, that's the recommendation I've made. The developer and applicant is probably going to want to respond to that and have that discussion.
Thank you.
Corey, just a technical correction perhaps in your recommended action. I want to make sure that we are dealing with the right subdivision here. I believe it's...
Put the wrong one in?
Page 4.
Yeah.
I think it's Moss Acres.
Moss Acres, correct. I stole the recommendation from the other report and didn't change that word.
Efficiency, that's efficiency right there.
I don't know, Corey might be trying to pull a quick one on Chad and approve the wrong subdivision.
Yeah.
Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll go ahead and invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this issue.
Chad Morris.
Can you address, maybe there are some other things that you would like to address, but it would be helpful for me if you could address the 30-foot setback issue and also this 18-month demolition plan that staff has proposed.
Yeah, the 30-foot setback, I think it's fairly upfront. There still allows quite a bit of space there for development on that lot. Really, and it mostly affects that middle lot, which is lot 3. Lot 4, it does affect it, but it's in the back, and so there's still a fairly good sized building pad in the front there, so there's no issues there, other than the fact that they can't build all the way back. But lot 3, and really, the plan is to still keep the house, and it always has been to keep the house, but it does give, an extra building, quite a bit of space of a building pad. It's a little bit awkward, but if you were able to just kind of add on to the house, especially, it allows for quite a large area for a home. But again, it's in the back of the lot, but that house is just in kind of an awkward spot anyway. But my hope is that the house stays quite a ways anyway. It's an older pioneer home. It's been updated quite a bit as well, so I see it lasting some time, quite a ways. So it's been added on to, I think, in the 70s, and And then they've updated the interior quite a bit as well, so. But yeah, and then on lot 1, or lot 2, the corner lot, it really just kind of cuts into that, really just the setback on that the northeast corner. So there's really not much of an effect on lot 2, that corner lot. Yeah, what specific questions do you have on that though?
No, you're confident that you're gonna be able to meet the 30-foot setbacks when you prepare the final site plan? I'm assuming that that's
Oh,
something
yeah,
that you can address.
definitely. I have no questions on that. And
Okay.
I'm assuming, yeah, if there were questions on that, I think we probably would have been held up at this point, so.
And what about that building there on lot 4?
Lot 4,
Yeah,
is that east lot?
the one that we weren't sure what it was. What is it,
Oh,
and do you have any concerns with demolishing it if?
Which building again is that? Can you point to
Can
that,
you
Corey?
circle
Yeah,
it,
there's a
Corey?
small building about the middle of the lot, some type of
Oh.
structure.
Yeah, a lot of those, the previous owner just put up a lot of tiny shed-like things for horses. They kept horse stuff in there, and but yeah, all those are quite honestly just kind of sheet or plywood. You know, there's not much to them. I could probably have my son go over there and hammer them down with a sledgehammer. So everything's gonna be easily taken down.
I thought we were talking about the one
In the-
south.
That's the
Yeah.
that's the garage. That's an actual garage with the garage door.
This
cement
is the one that was
floor.
unidentified. It's just a little tough sheds.
Yeah.
But the garage is going to exist.
Exactly.
For at least 18 months. That's what you were talking about. Right.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I want to address.
Yeah, so that one, it's a nice garage, decent shape. It might need a few new shingles and stuff on it, but it's definitely it's something that I would like to keep. It may be that the new owner, whoever builds a home, does not want it. I would think they would, because that property is about 3/10 of an acre, and it's all the way to the back. So, and there's kind of trees, so it's really a somewhat private spot. So I tend to think they would like it. But yeah, and to the question you guys had in terms of 18 months, I think Corey's right, where everything's fronting streets, existing streets, so it should be fairly easy to improve. In fact, even for the existing house, really the sewer, the water are already there in that lot, so that's not gonna be hampered much. Yeah, it should be pretty simple. Hopefully it doesn't go 18 months.
I was going to say, so do you feel like you'll be able to get a house on that 4th lot within those 18 months?
That's another question. Because I don't know. My guess is with the time frame right now with contractors, they're fairly booked, and so my thought is we're at the earliest we can get them to start is 4 months down, and depending on if we go on to the summer, we're now competing with the larger developments who need, contractors going to go to those. They're not going to care about us too much. So hopefully we can beat the rush before the summer for that. If not, that is a little bit of a concern, that trying to get contractors to just help us with this small of a development. And if that's the case, you're looking at about, I don't know, at the most I'd say a year for improvements, but I don't think it'll be that long. However, now you're looking at a year. If say it is a year at the most, then you're looking at finding a buyer for the property, and then you've got 6 months, at that to do all that. So I don't know.
Yeah, the regulation would be is if you pull a building permit for the home, you're back into compliance.
Okay,
So it's the issue of
as long
when
as
do you
they
think the
issue
building
the
permit would be issued?
Okay. So hopefully it works out. I would like 2 years, but but I don't see any problems with the 18 unless something goes wrong with timing.
So you feel like 2 years would be a little easier to,
make sure it's sold and
okay.
that permit's pulled, yeah. But is there a way to come in and grant an exception, like an extension, if we see that it is, hey, it took longer for the improvements and, you know, nobody's hopping on it, whatever it be. Is there a way, Corey, to come in for an extension of 6 months on that, or?
Yeah, the improvement bond, and the reason why it's tied to there is the improvement bond has definitive timelines that have to be hit.
Yeah.
And so to tie the bonding to that improvement bond, we'd have to do a separate system and create a separate bond and agreement if it's outside of the 18-month process and track that differently. And so I think it's worthy of discussion of what's the best way to resolve it. You know, the only concern that I've raised in the past is we've put notes on a plat, and we still have a decade later of a structure still up there, and you know, the city's not going to use its typical funds from the taxpayer to go tear that down. So now it's just a matter of, you know, do we get a court order and all of those fun elements that make things not fun for either party. So,
yeah,
you know, so I tied it to the bond because that's the easiest place to put it, track it, account for it. Everybody knows where the money is. If we go outside of that process, it would be a separate bond, I assume.
and I think that I feel comfortable with tying it to the bond and having that there. Is the only question is there a way to extend that if we see that there's problems?
I think we need to put it in perspective. The ordinances require the sheds to come down right now before you record the plat. That's the rule, because you can't create a nonconformity with the plat.
Right.
So we're already providing the flexibility. So, and we have in the past required people to tear down the sheds before they record the plat. So the times that we've allowed them to keep them are for large structures, structures that have significant value, that once you get the house on, then they'll keep it.
Right.
You know, but if you have sheds on there that are not of significant value, you know, my recommendation is tear them down now before you record the plat, provide this extension for anything of value. So.
Right. And that's kind of the question that I kept having is, I mean, it sounds like this is a building of value, and so it would make sense for it to remain. I just wanted to be in compliance with our ordinance and also be flexible so that we wouldn't just waste all of those materials for no reason. So,
Thanks. Does anyone else have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
This matter has been scheduled as a public hearing, so we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Invite anyone who wishes to speak to this matter to step forward. Seeing no one step forward, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Any further questions for staff?
Yeah, Corey, a question for maybe you and Lisa. So it seems like there is a little wiggle room in the amount of flexibility, and that wiggle room comes in the means of enforcement. Do we just put it on the plat like we've done in the past? Do we require it right now? And so my one question I had is, can you describe to me the underlying rationale as to why we don't allow accessory structures on a property that doesn't have a primary structure? Talk to me about what's the rationale behind that ordinance? Do you know?
Well, I can give you just past experiences, not so much of why this ordinance was written the way it was. It's generally, I think, common to you know, other concerns. You know, the first expectation, particularly when you're just dealing with a residential subdivision, is the expectation that we're building homes, and it's the construction of the homes that is the primary use of the property. It's the goal that the city wants to be developed is to have those single-family homes. What I've seen in the past when you kind of go away from establishing a primary use and letting accessory use exist is that people will convert the garage with the intention of building a home, and then it goes on for a long, long time. And you never really get a home there because they didn't have the money to build the home. so there's a lot of things that happen in these accessory buildings that are not set up to, one, function as a dwelling, and two, to complete the development pattern that's expected. And that's, I think, the primary and sole reason is that you're trying to close out and get a neighborhood built instead of leaving an old farm building that somebody converts to a one-bedroom apartment and other kind of fun things that can happen in accessory buildings that are not designed to be dwellings.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I think the main purpose behind the ordinance, or in addition to what Corey has said, is that we want to preserve the residential and the dwelling unit use in residential zones. And if you allow people to just put up garages and accessory structures without a primary use, they could just put a shed, a very large shed or garage next door to your home and never build a home and run their little storage unit out of that, or store all of their accessory vehicles. So we have a lot of lots out there that do this kind of thing, and we call them nuisance lots because they don't have a home on them. So that's what this ordinance is designed to prevent, is just more storage and accessory uses without someone living on the lot.
And Centerville steps a little bit further into that. There was a popular time to have the in-ground foundation homes and then put a roof on them, because the concept was build your foundation, live in it till you can get enough money and build the next story, and then it never gets built. And our ordinances currently prohibit basement homes because we're looking to complete the home rather than have a partial home constructed. So the accessory is even further down of the desirability use list from the basement home concept. So for now, we don't allow it.
Side question, slightly unrelated, or slightly related. It's important, I promise. Let's imagine that the building gets knocked down and the same financial constraints that prohibited the building permit that would have allowed for this nuisance lot to exist with the accessory dwelling unit prevented, so now let's take ceteris paribus, all else equal, we move to it got knocked down, and that same financial constraint exists and we have just a blank lot. Do you see anything in the code that would prevent that blank lot and whatever uses could happen on a vacant lot to step in similarly? Do we have any ways to protect against that situation?
Well, there's some likeness and kinship to that, because you can have just a vacant piece of ground become a nuisance lot due to just weeds because it never gets built on. I think the issue is more akin to what Lisa's trying to say in talking to you, is once you allow accessory uses to happen before primary use is established, you have a whole lot of other accessory uses that can occur. You can have RV parking, you can have other garages built, and this is an example where we had not too long ago, a year ago, the city, there was a piece of property where a person had a home and they had a large garage on another lot. The city approved the subdivision on the separating the home from that garage. That garage was always used by the person that owned the home until they passed. Then the family wanted to divide up and sell the home. Nobody in the family wanted the home, but one of the family members wanted the garage to store their Corvette in. And so today, we now have a garage that was not taken down during the subdivision, has been subsequently sold to someone else, still a family member. It now sits in a situation where they're storing their personal vehicles in there, but they don't live in the city. Now you have a setup that lot's going to be sold again to someone else, and what does that mean? So the weeds is a nuisance, but that's an enforcement. A garage sitting there being used by someone and trying to reverse that use becomes much more problematic.
And I think just to clear the record, that garage use was only allowed by going to the Board of Adjustment, and it was deemed that the city was stopped from enforcing that because we were negligent in approving the subdivision in the first place. And there was also evidence, there were actually 3 or 4 different garages on there. They were required to take down the one that didn't meet the setback. And they were allowed to keep some others, but there were some extenuating circumstances and a Board of Adjustment decision that granted that.
Thank you.
Yeah, we, as planners, lost the argument.
Any other questions for staff?
I know this is really nitpicky and it's a preliminary plat, but it seems to me like the fault line and the offsets look a lot like the road center line and the tie to the monument from the legend. I'm just wondering if those can be, to me it seems like a fairly significant thing for someone to know when they're looking at the plat, and can we call those out a little bit differently?
You're talking about the center line being put with
The
bearings on
roads-
them?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of hard to tell from
No,
legend, but it's not, to me, it's not clear. Like, I had to figure out that that was the fault line.
versus something else?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought it was
I don't think you have to
confusing,
call out the
so-
bearing and say, here's the GPS location of where the two rocks separated from each other back 650 years ago. The easement is the important part, not the bearing of the center line.
Well, I'm not talking about the center line, I'm talking about the fault line. I think it looks like the road
Just
center
using a
lines.
more hashed
I want
area
it
or
called out
thicker
on the
line.
legend that there's a fault line and there's an offset where they have to avoid.
Yeah, more like just a formatting issue that the engineer can illustrate that better.
It's just, I mean, it is kind of nitpicky, but I think it should be noted that for the final plat, I think that needs to be way more clear.
For
where
final
the
plat,
fault line is, and
accentuate the
that-
fault line.
And that it is a fault line and that there is an offset requirement.
Oh, so you're looking at the graphical representation
Legend.
of that line?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
I see it's marked there. I just, for me, it was until I got into the geotechnical report, I was like, oh, that really is the fault line. Because I looked at it and thought, why did they put the road center line through the middle of the,
yeah, I see what you're saying. It's
You
a
know what I'm
it's a
saying?
graphical format choice.
yeah. I think it needs to be, I think it needs to stand out a little bit more
Right.
than it does.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Note, though, this preliminary has a lot of oddities on it that you're not going to see on the plat. So all the
Yeah.
buildings and the trees and the driveways are going to come off with the final, so it will be highlighted. But still, I think that's a good condition to add, that for the final plat, accentuate the fault line and the
I think it's
offset.
great to have the note, and that obviously is very helpful to have the note, have them sign the hazards thing, but I also think that people are just tend to be visual, and so if it's really a little bit more clear, I think it helps them know what they're doing.
Skull and crossbones, would that be?
A little bit.
Do not buy.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. Any,
You don't need to put that on the plat, just.
any other questions for staff? All right, any other further discussion or debate? Chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve the preliminary subdivision for the Moss Acres subdivision, subject to conditions 1 through 7 in the staff report, adding an additional condition 8, that the fault line will be clearly visually denoted, or what should I say there? That the legend will clearly illustrate the visual fault line
And the offsets.
and the offsets, with suggested reasons for actions A through C.
Second.
The motion has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
I feel comfortable about the 18 months and tying it to the bond as well.
I do too. And it sounds like the applicant at the end of the day was okay with it as well.
Yep.
All right, let's take a roll call. Commissioner Hershey?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you. Moving to the third matter on our agenda. All right, so I have asked to put on our agenda topic the Planning Commission goals that we have for 2018. Last year, we had come up with some goals that we had sent up to the city council. I thought it would be a good thing to revisit those, which I asked Cassie to include in the in the packet. I thought, let's take a look at those, reevaluate. Are those still our goals? Do we want to change those goals?
Yeah, just if I can add, Chair, the budget season is shortly approaching. In the past, the City Council has held joint work sessions to talk about goals, so I think this is an appropriate time to start having those discussions and solidifying some of those ideas by the time you arrive to those work sessions, so you're greater prepared to discuss why you've set those and get the City Council to help sanction those.
From my perspective, we've come up with a great list of goals every year, but actually marking those goals off the list seems to always be a challenge. So one of the things I'd like to propose and discuss is maybe we can identify one or two that are the top priority goals, work on passing those, and then if we can get those completed, then we can look kind of further down our goals list. But I think maybe if we're to set one priority goal or at most two priority goals and then really work hard to try to bang those out this year, maybe we'll.
If I could just add one commentary so that you can, and it's intended to support you, so and it certainly makes a point of my experience. I know the first goal, greater proactive planning. I don't disagree with your concept on that, so don't take it as a disagreement, but I think this is much a controversy. And so I think if that's something that you do set as a higher priority, to take the theme and the action, put some elbow grease and work into it. It's my experience, and as of even late, that this council in their leadership is much more a hands-on group and is less likely to particularly move anything to a staff level. And so I think that's a discussion, because I know in the past conversations, as I recall, the commission wanted to spend a little bit more time doing the proactive planning than the reaction planning, because you can get caught up into that reactionary planning. And then we find things that we wished and coulda, shoulda, woulda in the middle of it all. I think if that remains a priority, you should have an extensive discussion on what your expectations are, what you're trying to accomplish, because I think there are some good things that come out of that as we talk about even down to the moderate income housing, where you can reduce time for projects to go through, save some of the fees, be more efficient in your processes, and even more responsive to the general public in some things. You know, example tonight is you had the CUP for the manufacturing. My initial take, and again, this is always absent of that little golden nugget in the public process, is that really didn't need to occupy your time. A lot of cities will have what they call major and minor conditional use permits, or major and minor permits. And there's categories that say the zoning administrator handles this unless they're uncomfortable with it. So there's a small public process pointed out there. If they discover something like a golden nugget, they can bump it up. But it allows to split out some of these things between the staff and the commission. But I'll take you back to another easy one, even though that one seems simple in your mind. Not too long ago, the commission was uncomfortable with the food trucks, the snow cones being scattered throughout the city. And those, again, are one of those types of uses that could be inside of the smaller permit and done more administratively. So you have to decide, are those the uses that we want to begin with, let alone move them into a more administrative staff review. So I just bring that up examples is I think there's some great benefit to that, but I think we do need to discuss and come up with some tactics that when we go to the council, they feel more confident that we've covered the basis and less likely that they find a frustration that they wish they would have had their hands dirty into the project, for lack of better terms. And so I think that's one that we need to take some work and decide.
May I make a comment on that? I know that a lot of cities have moved that direction, and in talking with other planners and city attorneys that have been successful in that, specifically Layton, talked with the city attorney up there, where they've really tried to, and they haven't been always successful in doing so, but they really have tried to streamline their decision-making process and allow their planning commission and their council more time to deal with other larger issues, if you will. Their biggest struggle was trying to decide among themselves how to approach it to begin with, and finally they decided that allow staff and council for the city to identify the primary areas where streamlining could be effective, and actually create a staff report that allowed the commission then to debate it, and a motion with reasons for action that we could discuss, so that we had a framework for our discussion rather than just making it out of whole cloth. I know that puts a lot of burden on staff and council to try to crystal ball it, but I think that that's really kind of where we need to start, because we could discuss as a commission for a long time which ones we kind of like, and it just never gets put into a place where we can deal with it.
Didn't we have something similar to that when we originally started talking about this? I remember you gave us a report that talked about legislative and administrative and different decisions, and I mean, it was kind of a high level of what he's talking about here. But I think you could probably take that report and flesh that out a little bit more with some of the delineations of the different categories, and allow us to then have that discussion. I think that's a great suggestion.
Well, and I think that looking to other cities might give our city council comfort in terms of how we structure it, because if we're seeing that a lot of other cities are moving this direction and they've had the opportunity to put it in place and kind of work out some of the kinks, then we can benefit from that experience. And so I think it would be helpful on my end to see what other cities have done and how they've structured it, so that we can try to take the best of those approaches in crafting one. Because from a sort of larger 10,000 foot level, I mean, the question is, what role is the planning commission? Are we supposed to be more global planners, or do we want to be more reactionary on a individual basis? I mean, I view the planning commission's role as being more forward-looking, more global-looking, and that's how I view that. And I think that we do get caught up in the minutia of working through administrative matters that really don't need our attention as much, and as a result, we are not able to get to this list of really worthy topics that I think that we could much better spend our time looking forward to.
And as a result, we have the idea, I mean, I know we talked a lot about the idea of sort of removing public hearings from administrative decisions, because sometimes that gets us into trouble too with well, let's have a public hearing. And yes, that's good to hear some of the things that we can then add into conditions and such, but also sometimes it makes us
You're not listening to the public. Even though it's
appear that we are holding a public meeting, a public hearing for no reason.
Right.
Well, and the city council looks at it differently, because
Exactly.
most of the
So-
decisions that the city council is making are legislative in nature.
Right.
And so I'm sure that they look at public hearings through a different lens, whereas
Yes.
we are very constrained in what we can do on
Yes.
any administrative decision. And so in those instances, a public hearing serves a very different purpose
Right.
than what a public hearing would serve in front of the city council.
Right. Yeah, so that's another thing I've always thought about. I also think, depending on how other cities do this, and I'm sure they have greater ideas, but I wonder if there's even a way that we could streamline a lot of things and then have some sort of catch or something where there's still a period of time where if something has streamlined and the city council, hears public outcry or something, they have some sort of power to look at that decision, so that things keep going forward and we keep moving forward, and then maybe something was missed and it was approved forward and there's public outcry, then they could then get their hands dirty, so you say, as in that process. I don't know
The way I envision it
how that works,
is
but
that we would recommend ordinance changes that would streamline the process.
right.
And if there was public outcry over something that we did at a later date, through the legislative process that the council goes through, they change the ordinance.
Right.
And they can change it back. But until we get something that we can recommend to the city council and they buy off on, we really aren't moving forward in the process.
As we look at this list that we had developed last year, is there anything on this list that's screaming out for anyone to take off? Or is there anything that we need to be putting onto this list that wasn't on our radar last year?
Well, I think it should say city trails, not city trials and pathways.
Oh, I'm just letting my subconscious leak out. letting that leak out, city. One thing that I suggest you consider, the city council during the West Centerville neighborhood plan, we had a big process. We did a Wasatch Front Regional Grant. I recognize how intense that West plan was and the reaction back to it. But that's something that we've achieved some build out of the commercial area now with the Legacy Commons being approved. I do know that there are interested landowners. Property is up for sale right now. Closure of a facility is potentially real. I don't know that for sure yet. That's the CIRO, but there's some effort to figure out how to master plan that area. Now, I'm jumping ahead because I know that property owners are already having discussions with each other and trying to figure out what the market is. But at the same time, you know, you need to respect what the city and what we would expect, you know, that area to be. So, you know, I don't know if resurrecting that plan, because the council said no, but we'll come back to this plan. And then we've been off on other tangents. Important, but tangents.
We see a lot of action happening, coming before us in the West Centerville. I mean, there's a lot that I can think of right now that have come before the commission for that West Centerville neighborhood. So I think there is movement happening, and if we're really trying to be proactive, that might be a place to start right there.
Yeah, I'd encourage us to put that as number one. I tend to try not to make it a habit to agree with Corey, but I do on both of these. I think that we move West Centerville neighborhood up to one. I think there's pressure, and I think that there's a chance we could take a chunk of that. And I think if we tried to focus on greater proactive planning as an actual goal, I support it, and I like that direction. But I think our council, I agree with Corey. I've dealt with Layton. What they've done is fantastic. We've had some projects up there, and there's a lot of stuff that makes a lot of sense. But I think the Layton City Council's got a little bit different pressures on them than our city council. And I think our city council wants to be really careful. They're a unique city council. So I think if we tried to push that one too hard, we'll find we will get a low ROI from our efforts. So I'd advocate putting West Centerville neighborhood to number one.
And I agree with that, but what I found interesting in the open house we had with the Wasatch Regional Council just recently, there were some, I think there were some interesting breakthroughs when they started talking about transportation hub, you know, fast or express bus service, possibility of an overpass at Porter Lane, you know, things like that, that I know those are probably way in the future, but if we don't start planning for them now, we're not going to achieve that goal. And it seemed to me that there were some council members there who recognized that could be a real benefit for that area, and may be willing to take another hard look at this. Again, having sat on that committee with the stakeholders and developing a rather aggressive multi-use plan for that area that ultimately didn't make it through. It was a little frustrating, but maybe it was a little bit too soon. But now things are changing. Like you say, the commercial development down there, the transportation systems, the things that we're really looking at make it more likely, I think, in my opinion, to be maybe a bit more fruitful this time around. And so I agree with you, Logan, perhaps moving that to the top of the list, forming another study committee, getting the stakeholders involved, and doing some proactive planning in that area makes, would be a good idea at this point.
Corey, this may be a very nice segue, because Corey said, don't forget to remind him to find out who is
Yes.
available.
Thank you.
Yes, there's a joint work session that we're looking at setting up with the city council, and I think this would be an ideal topic to address with them and take their temperature and see which direction that they would like us to head, where it would be helpful for them for us to head. So is everyone available on February 21st? You're out, Gina.
I'm out of town. I apologize.
I have a different training, so
And you're out?
I'm out.
I'm good.
Dave?
More than likely, I'm in.
Okay, and I've confirmed with Kevin that he's available and I'm available, so that gives us at least 4.
Yeah, and I've forwarded the email that thanks for
Yes.
contacting Kevin, and I'll talk with the city manager, but tentatively, we would do the 21st, and I'll let you know if they change.
Well, maybe let's do this then. Take a look at the list, think about that. I appreciate you letting us know, Corey, that there may be some opportunity for movement quickly on West Centerville side, because that may make sense to go ahead and bump that up to the top of the list. But I think it makes sense. Let's visit this in connection with the city council at our work session and see how it's looking. And then maybe the next meeting after we come back from that city council work session, we can finalize our goals for 2018.
The other thing I would encourage us to do, I think if we bumped the West Centerville neighborhood plan up, that right there is proactive planning. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Sure. So we could, I think.
It's kind of funny. Actually, our goal, number one goal used to be some administrative little thing that we were trying to do. When we should have maybe just been proactive planning in the first place. Yeah.
But I was going to say that I do think once we've established what our priority is, or priority 1 and sub-priority, or whatever we're going to call it, I would encourage us to put dates to it and put benchmarks, because personally, when I have a goal or a priority that is wide and vast, it is not achievable, not as achievable as I'd like it to be. But if I have constraints of time and benchmarks, then that will encourage me to do what I need to do. So,
And I like that, because that then gives me, once we finalize and put those out, that gives me the ability to communicate and interact with the mayor and city manager and start balancing those times that requests come down. Okay, we need to keep this benchmark in mind as we.
And I think you can give us a good, clear understanding of suggestions on those dates based on what you see.
Great. Well, there's no further discussion on this. I'm going to move us along because we have a couple of us that need to get out at 8:30. And the last thing that is on our agenda is review and approval of the minutes for January 24th. So let's go ahead and take a look at those, and we'll just go through page by page. Any comments or corrections on page 1?
I would suggest on line 41 that where it says expire the permit, 12 months, in 12 months the permit would expire.
Okay. Any other comments? Page 2.
Line 1, rabbits need a permit. I don't think the rabbits need the permit. I think the rabbit owners need the permit.
I'm glad we have you.
Really smart rabbits.
I'm glad we have you.
Any other further comments on page 2?
26, Mr. Snyder replied that Centerville, just to keep it in the same tense.
Okay. Page 3. Page 4. And I had just a couple of minor nits here on line 34. Hurst stated that he represents the Cooks and the Hursts. I think those are just plural, not possessive. So no apostrophe before either S. And then in line 40, use is capitalized, and I would just make that a little use.
Line 42, the word "they" should be "it." It's referring to the stout building. It would require 72 stalls. Unless we're referring to somebody else, but I think
Yeah, it's referring to the stout building. Any other comments on page 4? Page 5. So this section here from paragraphs, or from lines 7 through 18, it starts off by reading that Mr. Snyder is addressing a comment, and then it switches to a discussion that the Stouts had with a prior planning commission, but it almost makes it sound like the Stouts were here and addressing this planning commission. So I would recommend on line 11, so let me just go back on line 8. So we're talking now before. Mr. Snyder said that in the original report, the staff had acknowledged that when the project was developed, there was insufficient parking for one of the lots, and quoted the city ordinance that owners have to maintain all of their stalls on their lot unless another mechanism is provided, period. The Stouts, and then take out then, explained to a prior, or the prior planning commission that, does that make it more clear? As such, the Stouts, and then in line 12, starting there, as such, the Stouts asked and then insert the word prior planning commission to approve. I think that makes it more clear that the Stouts weren't here talking to us, that we're talking about the Stouts talking to a prior planning commission.
Agreed.
yeah, agreed.
Okay. Any other, sorry, that was a long comment. I probably could have just inserted that. Any other comments on page 5? Page 6?
I just had a question, just a follow-up question. Beginning in line 40, Ms. Romney suggested the 7th condition be added: the staff research and report back to the Planning Commission on the form and status of the shared access agreement. I don't know where we're at in that process. I was just curious.
The owner of the property, in talking with the tenants, they're looking at some alternative issues associated with that development, and we've been placed on hold on whether they're pursuing it further or changing direction.
Okay, so we're still waiting for something from the owners on that. Okay.
Great question. Any other changes on page 6? Actually, I don't think there are any. Page 7? Page 8? Page 9? Chair will entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the minutes.
Second,
Thank you.
as amended.
As amended.
Second.
The motion has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Well, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it passes. I think that's it. Let's turn it over to Corey for the Community Development Director's report.
Just
Madam
real,
Chair, I do
Yes.
need to
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Yes, Commissioner
You did.
Hersey, you are excused.
just real quick, we have a project scheduled for your next commission. Canyon Point is the project that was in the RM zone on 400 East, just on the south lots fronting Parish. There's that infill piece. It's expired and coming back under the new RM ordinance, so you'll be reviewing that. And the Pages Lane update, the council.
That was with.
So you'll have that project to look at. It looks like there's kind of some flux. We'll see what they bring back by Monday. It may be bumped. Council met in a work session on Pages Lane. They asked staff to draft some edits and to renotice the Pages Lane plan. Essentially what their edits are doing is taking away any park options and potentially converting to residential with a substantial size of residential to be converted. They want to recognize the existing commercial for the short term, residential for the long term, and a buffer be established between the two block areas. So we're preparing those edits as we speak.
Did you hear about Steak and Shake?
Yes, they closed.
What about Steak and Shake?
They closed, and Jackson's is taking it over, and they're going to expand the fast food operation into more convenience at this point. So they, and then they want to renotice that and talk about Pages Lane and maybe finally make a decision.
Great.
It's a tough spot.
Great, thank you very much. All right, I think that's it. I move we adjourn. All those in favor?
I
Aye.
Thank you, guys.